My glasses hit the floor before I did. All because I said no to co-signing my brother's mortgage. My father slapped me so hard my shoulder came out of place. When my mother tried to help me, he shoved her down too. And my brother? The first thing he reached for wasn't me. It was the paperwork. That night, bleeding and barely able to walk, I crawled to the only door I thought might still open. But what I found later proved this was never really about a house. It was about control. I used to think saying no made me a bad son. That night taught me something different. A family that only loves you when you're useful isn't asking for loyalty. They're asking for control. And the hardest part is realizing you may have trained them to expect your silence. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Then ask yourself this. How much should a person sacrifice before family stops being love and becomes control? My glasses hit the hardwood before I did. That was the sound I remember most. Not my father's voice, not my mother crying out, not even the sharp pain that tore through my shoulder when I went down against the dining chair. It was my glasses, a small crack, a slide across the floor, then everything in front of me blurred. My father stood over me, red-faced, breathing hard through his nose like I had done something unforgivable. "You should have signed the papers," he said. I tried to push myself up with my left hand, but my right shoulder screamed so badly I nearly blacked out. My legs had folded under me wrong, and every movement sent pain through my knees and shins. "Chandler, stop," my mother cried. She rushed toward me, but my father shoved her back with one arm. She stumbled into the dining chair and hit the floor hard enough to knock the breath out of her. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not calm, quiet. Because the man who once held the back of my bicycle seat while I learned to ride was standing over me like I was a stranger he wanted, removed from his house. "My name is Quinton Keegan. I am 38 years old. I work as an operations manager for a logistics company in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I was the youngest son in my family, which sounds simple until you understand what that meant in our house. My older brother, Dorian, was the son my father bragged about. I was the son he called when something needed fixing. If Dorian got into trouble, people said he was under pressure. If I said no to anything, I was selfish. If Dorian needed help, it was family loyalty. If I protected myself, it was betrayal. Nobody ever sat me down and said, "You matter less." They did it in quieter ways. They forgot my work promotion but toasted Dorian's new sales job. They asked me to cover repairs on Mom's car but called it just helping out. They praised me for being responsible, then treated my responsibility like a family bank account. When I was 14, my mother helped me open my first savings account. The bank gave me a little blue savings book. I still remember Dad tapping it with one finger and saying, "Protect your future. Nobody else will." I believed him. That little book stayed with me through college, layoffs, long shifts, and the first time I bought furniture with money I had earned myself. It was not worth anything anymore, not in a banking sense, but I kept it because it reminded me that I had built my life one careful choice at a time. 3 months before that night, on the dining room floor, Dorian announced he and his fiancée, Lacey Mercer, had found their dream house. Sunday dinner at my parents' place started like any other. Mom made pot roast. Dad sat at the head of the table. Dorian talked like a man already posing for wedding photos on the front porch. "It has 4 bedrooms, Lachi said, smiling at me. "Perfect for when we start a family." I smiled back because I wanted to be happy for them. Then Dad reached beside his chair and placed a folder on the table. Mortgage papers. A pen already clipped to the top. My stomach tightened before anyone spoke. "The lender just needs a stronger guarantor," Dad said. "Your credit is excellent. This is where you step up." I looked at Dorian. He did not look surprised, neither did Lassie. Even Mom lowered her eyes. They had not invited me to dinner. They had arranged a signing. "I need to review this," I said. Dad gave a thin smile. "There's nothing to review. It's for your brother." That was how the pressure started. Dorian reminded me about rides he gave me when we were younger. Lachi talked about future nieces and nephews. Dad said family was not supposed to nickel and dime each other. When I brought up my own mortgage plans, my retirement, the risk of being legally tied to a loan I did not control, nobody answered the facts. They went after my character instead. "You act like you're better than us," Dorian said. Lachi dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "We just thought you cared." Dad leaned back and said, "A good son doesn't make his family beg." I did not yell. I did not insult them. I took the papers, spoke with a financial advisor, then an attorney. Both told me the same thing. If Dorian missed payments, I would be responsible. If he defaulted, my credit and savings could collapse right along with his. So I said no, calmly, clearly, respectfully. And that was when I learned my father did not hear a boundary. He heard rebellion. The argument that night moved fast. Dad's jaw locked. Dorian stood near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. Lachi stayed behind him, silent except for one sentence I will never forget. One signature could have prevented all this. Then Dad came at me. The slap knocked my glasses away. Another shove sent me into the chair. Pain burst through my shoulder. My mother hit the floor trying to reach me. And as I lay there, struggling to breathe, the little blue savings book slipped from inside my jacket and landed beside my broken glasses. A dark red stain touched the corner of its faded cover. Dad looked down at me, not with fear, not with regret, but with disgust. "You deserve this," he said. "Get out of my sight." As I dragged myself toward the front door, I realized the beating had not started that day. It had started years earlier, and I had finally stopped pretending not to see it. The porch light above my parents' front door flickered once as I pulled myself across the threshold. I remember thinking how ordinary it looked. Same brick steps. Same hanging basket Mom watered every morning. Same welcome mat with the faded word "Blessed" printed across it. I had stepped over that mat hundreds of times. That night I dragged myself over it. My right arm hung close to my body, useless and burning. My left hand scraped against the concrete as I tried to move forward without putting pressure on my shoulder. One of my legs would not bend right, so it trailed behind me in short, ugly movements. Inside the house, I could still hear voices. Not panic, not anyone calling 911, just voices. Dorian said something I could not make out. Lacey answered softly. My father's tone was low and sharp, the way he sounded when he believed a conversation was finished. No one came outside. That silence did something to me. The pain was terrible, but silence has a different kind of cruelty. Pain tells you something is broken. Silence tells you nobody cares enough to check. I made it to the edge of the driveway and stopped there, breathing through my teeth. The night air smelled like wet leaves and gasoline from Dad's old pickup. My broken glasses were still inside. The blue savings book was gone too, unless it had fallen into my coat lining. I could not think clearly enough to know. Lying there, half on the driveway, half in the grass, I started seeing pieces of my life in a way I never had before. Not one big memory, small ones. Dorian was 16 when he backed Dad's truck into the mailbox. Somehow, I was the one sent outside to help fix it, because your brother feels bad enough already. When Dorian nearly failed algebra, I spent every weeknight at the kitchen table tutoring him. When he passed with a C-, Dad took him out for ribs and told the waitress, "That boy fought hard for it." When I got a scholarship to Western Michigan, Mom made a cake. Dad said he was proud. But by dessert, he was already talking about Dorian's summer job at the dealership. That was how it worked. Dorian stumbled, and the room leaned toward him. I stood steady, and nobody looked. I used to think that meant I was strong. Later, I realized it meant I was convenient. The blue savings book came back to me then. I was 14, standing at a credit union counter with Mom beside me. I had earned that first deposit mowing lawns, shoveling snow, and helping an older neighbor haul boxes out of her basement. $10 and some change. Dad had picked up the booklet, tapped the cover, and said, "Every dollar you save is a piece of freedom." I built my whole life around that sentence. I drove used cars, I packed lunches, I worked overtime. I kept an emergency fund, because Dad used to say a man who cannot cover 6 months of trouble is one bad week away from begging. So when Dorian and Lassie handed me their mortgage folder, I did what Dad taught me to do. I looked at the numbers. A few weeks before everything fell apart, I took the paperwork to Althea Briggs, my financial advisor. Her office was downtown, above a small insurance agency with a coffee shop next door. I went there during lunch, still wearing my work badge, hoping she would tell me I was overreacting. She did not. Althea read quietly for almost 20 minutes. She circled figures with a blue pen. She flipped back and forth between pages. Once, she stopped, pressed her lips together, and looked at me over her glasses. "Quinton," she said, "why can't your brother qualify on his own?" That question should have been obvious, but I had not asked it out loud. I told her Dorian was in sales, that commissions went up and down, that the lender just wanted extra security. She turned the folder toward me. "The income estimate is optimistic. The debt disclosure looks incomplete. And if you co-sign, this debt may be counted against you when you apply for anything else. Your own mortgage, a refinance, even certain business credit lines." I sat back slowly. "So if he misses payments, you are exposed," she said. "Not emotionally. Legally," that word stayed with me. Legally. Family members love to say things like, "It's just a signature," when the signature belongs to somebody else. After that meeting, I did not accuse anyone. I checked public records. I reviewed what I could verify. I spoke with a mortgage professional I trusted from work. What I found made my stomach turn. Dorian and Lassie had credit cards close to their limits. A truck payment was behind. Their wedding costs had already climbed past what they admitted. There were late payments they never mentioned at dinner. The dream house was not a home they were ready to buy. It was a gamble wrapped in white siding and wedding photos. And I was supposed to be the safety net. I called Dorian the next evening, trying to keep my voice even. "Some of these numbers don't make sense," I said. "I need you to be honest with me before you ask me to put my name on this." He went quiet for maybe 2 seconds. Then the anger came. "You're digging into my life now. I'm reviewing a loan you want me attached to." "Family isn't supposed to investigate family," he snapped. That line told me more than any credit report could. Honest people do not usually fear reasonable questions. They may be embarrassed. They may explain. They may even ask for privacy. But they do not act like transparency is betrayal. That night, after going through the documents one more time, I finally understood what my father had really been asking of me. He was not asking me to help my brother build a future. He was asking me to absorb the consequences of a future that was already cracking before the foundation was poured. And the next morning, I decided I was going to tell them the truth. I had no idea that one conversation would push us all past the point of no return. I did not sleep much after that call with Dorian. By 6 the next morning, I was at my kitchen table with coffee I barely touched, spreading papers across the surface like I was preparing for a board meeting instead of a family conversation. Mortgage estimate, debt summary, payment schedule, credit impact, notes from Althea Briggs. I even wrote one sentence at the top of a yellow legal pad: "Stay calm, stick to facts." That was still my mistake back then. I thought facts could save a conversation if people cared enough to hear them. That Sunday, I drove to my parents' house with the folder on the passenger seat. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Maple leaves had started turning along the curb. Somebody down the block was mowing their lawn. Nothing about the street warned me that I was about to walk into a room where love had already been replaced by expectation. Mom opened the door before I knocked. "Pot roast is almost done," she said too brightly. Her smile looked practiced. In the living room, football played low on the TV. Dad sat in his recliner, one ankle over his knee, pretending this was a normal family dinner. Dorian stood near the fireplace, laughing with Lotsie about paint colors for the nursery someday. That word landed hard. Nursery. They were already building a life in a house they could not afford, using money and credit they had not earned. At dinner, Mom tried to keep things light. She asked about work. Dad complained about road construction near 28th Street. Lassie described ivory table runners for the wedding reception. Dorian joked that I could help him build a deck once they moved in. I let everyone finish eating. Then I placed my folder on the table. "I looked over the mortgage paperwork," I said. "I also spoke with a financial advisor." The room changed before I opened the folder. Dorian's fork stopped halfway to his plate. Lassie's smile tightened. Dad leaned back slowly. I laid out the pages one by one. "I'm not here to accuse anybody. I just want everyone to understand what this means. If I co-sign, that debt can count against me. If payments are late, my credit takes the hit. If there's a default, I'm responsible too." Dad waved one hand. "Nobody is defaulting." "That's not a plan," I said. "That's hope." Dorian gave a short laugh. "Listen to him. He has charts now." I kept my voice level. "The numbers don't support this purchase. The income estimate is high. The debts listed are incomplete. The wedding budget is not included anywhere." Lacey's eyes flashed. "Our wedding is not your business. It becomes my business when you want my signature backing your mortgage." That was the first moment Dad's face hardened. "You always were good at making people feel small," he said. I looked at him, stunned. "I'm explaining risk." "No," Dorian said. "You're acting like we're irresponsible children." Nobody challenged the figures. Not one person asked to see Althea's notes. They went straight for my character, because the math was not on their side. Lassie dabbed her napkin under one eye. "We thought you'd be happy for us. We told the realtor you were supportive." I stared at her. "You told the realtor what?" She glanced at Dorian. He looked away. "That little movement told me plenty." Dad leaned forward. "Don't twist this. The question is simple. Are you standing with your brother or not?" Mom's hands were folded in her lap. I noticed her thumb rubbing the side of her wedding band. Again and again. Her plate was almost untouched. She knew something was wrong. Maybe she had known for weeks. But fear kept her seated. I wanted her to say something, anything. She did not. Dorian pushed his chair back. You know what your problem is? You think having a steady paycheck makes you better than everybody. No, I said. I think signing a mortgage I can't control is dangerous. Dad's voice dropped. A good son does not make his family beg. There it was, not reason, not truth, obedience. I closed the folder. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I'm not signing. The room went still. Lachi looked as if I had slapped her. Dorian's jaw moved like he was chewing on words he did not dare say in front of Mom. Dad stared at me with a kind of cold disappointment I had spent my whole life trying to avoid. But I did not take it back. After a long silence, Dad stood and walked toward the front door. Come on, he said. I'll see you out. I followed him because I still wanted to believe the worst had passed. At the door, he did not look at me right away. He opened it and stared out at the porch light. Then he said quietly, "Families remember who stands with them." It sounded almost reasonable. That was the frightening part. I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel, replaying every word. The folder sat beside me like evidence from a case nobody wanted solved. By the time I reached my driveway, I understood something I had missed at dinner. My father had not been making a comment. He had been giving me a warning. And 3 days later, that warning became something much more dangerous than words. 3 days after that dinner, my phone started ringing before I even finished my first cup of coffee. Dorian called first. I let it go to voicemail. Then Lachi called. Then Aunt Maribel from Holland. Then my cousin Grant, who had not called me in 8 months, but suddenly had deep feelings about my duty as a brother. By noon, I was sitting in my office with logistics reports open on one screen and family messages filling the other. Every call sounded different, but the script was the same. Family helps family. Your brother would do it for you. Your father is taking this hard. Nobody asked what the mortgage terms were. Nobody asked whether Dorian could afford the house. Nobody asked why the lender wanted me involved in the first place. They had all been handed the same story. And in that story, I was the problem. Around 3, a family friend named Paul stopped by the warehouse to drop off parts for one of our delivery bays. He shook my hand, glanced around like he was about to share bad news, and said, "I heard things are rough with your brother. Shame to see money come between family." Money, that word made me pause. It's not money, I said. It's liability. Paul gave me that careful smile people use when they think you are being technical to avoid being generous. Well, he said, your dad says it's just a signature. I went back to my office after he left and shut the door. Just a signature. That was how they were selling it. Not a 30-year obligation. Not legal exposure. Not a risk to my own future, just a favor, just family, just one little thing. By the time I drove home, I felt worn down in a way sleep would not fix. That evening, Mom came by without calling first. She carried a plastic container of chicken soup, the kind she always made when somebody was sick. I knew she was not there because of soup. She sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea I made for her. For several minutes, she stared at the steam. Then she said, "Are you sure, honey?" I looked at her gently. Yes, she nodded, but her eyes were tired. "I know your father is upset. That doesn't make him right." Her mouth trembled a little. She looked toward the hallway, even though nobody else was in the house. Then, very quietly, she said, "I think you're being more responsible than anyone else in this family." I did not answer at first. I just sat there, because it was the first time anyone inside that house had said what I needed to hear. Then fear crossed her face, fast and familiar. "Don't tell your father I said that." That hurt almost as much as the rest. After she left, I watched her taillights disappear down the street. I wanted to feel comforted, but all I could think was this. If even my mother was afraid to say the truth out loud, what exactly was I dealing with? The next afternoon, I met Althea again. This time, I brought updated documents Dorian had emailed after I pushed him for details. Her office smelled like printer paper and burnt coffee. She reviewed the pages in silence, tapping her pen against one section. "This projection assumes a commission increase," she said. "Dorian says he's due for one. Due is not guaranteed." She turned another page. "And these wedding expenses are not included in the monthly cash flow. They said gifts would cover most of it." Althea looked at me over the paper. "That is not a financial plan." Then she found the part that changed everything. A private financing arrangement tied to the purchase, separate from the main mortgage. Not illegal by itself, but dangerous when combined with everything else. If the closing fell apart, Dorian and Lassie would lose a large non-refundable deposit. If it went through, they would be stretched from the very first payment. There was no cushion, No margin, no room for a bad month. Althea set the documents down. Quinton, this house was never affordable. Not even under generous assumptions. I drove from her office to a coffee shop near Breton Road and sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before going inside. That was where Ronan Mercer called me. Ronan had been married to my older sister before she passed. He was not blood, but he had always treated me with more honesty than most people who shared my last name. His voice was careful. I probably should have called sooner, he said. Dorian told me about the deposit. It's bigger than he admitted. If this deal collapses, they're out a lot of money. How much, he told me. I closed my eyes. Suddenly, every call, every guilt trip, every accusation made sense. They were not chasing a dream anymore. They were trying to outrun a financial mistake. And I was supposed to be the landing pad. That night, I called Dorian one last time. I know about the deposit, I said. I know about the side agreement. I know this is riskier than you told me. He did not deny it. He got angry. You had no right digging around. You asked me to sign my name to your loan. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He said. You finally get to act superior. I'm giving you a chance to be honest. His voice dropped. If you don't help us, you'll regret it. The line went dead. I sat there with the phone in my hand, listening to the empty tone. That was not disappointment. That was not hurt feelings. That was a threat. Later, I opened the blue savings book and ran my thumb over the old cover. Those worn pages held years of work, restraint, and choices nobody else had the right to spend. Then I walked to my small home safe, placed the book inside, and locked it. Not because I thought the book itself mattered. Because I finally understood what my own family might do to everything it represented. The next confrontation was supposed to be a conversation. By the end of it, every remaining illusion would be shattered. I should have walked away after Dorian's threat. That would have been the clean, sensible thing to do. Block the calls. Send one final message. Let the mortgage deal fail on its own. But families have a way of making common sense feel cruel. So I tried one more time. I chose a small restaurant near Cascade Road, the kind of place with vinyl booths, framed pictures of old Grand Rapids landmarks, and waitresses who called everyone Han. Neutral ground. Public enough that nobody should raise their voice. Quiet enough that we could still talk like adults. I arrived early with a folder under my arm. Inside were listings for smaller homes, notes on first-time buyer assistance, lender contacts, and a simple monthly budget I had built from the information I could verify. I even included a plan where I would help pay for a financial counseling session. Not as a loan, not as a co-signature, just as practical help. I still wanted to believe there was a bridge left. Dorian and Lassie came in first. He wore a sport coat like this with some business lunch. She kept her purse tight against her side and avoided looking at my folder. Dad and Mom arrived 5 minutes later. Mom looked worried. Dad looked offended before he even sat down. I waited until coffee was poured and menus were closed. Then I opened the folder. I put together some options, I said. No co-signing. No unlimited liability, but real options. Dorian leaned back. Here we go. I ignored that. There are homes in Wyoming and Kentwood that would keep your monthly payment lower. There's also a lender Althea recommended who works with buyers rebuilding credit. If you wait 6 to 8 months and reduce the wedding budget, you may qualify without me. Leitchi gave a small, sharp laugh. Reduce the wedding budget? It would help your debt-to-income ratio, I said. Dad folded his arms. This is insulting. No, I said, keeping my voice low. It's realistic. For a brief moment, everyone was quiet. I thought maybe some part of it had landed. Maybe a small horror house sounded less exciting, but safer. Maybe Dad would remember all those lessons he taught me about not overextending. Then Dorian closed the folder with 2 fingers. You always think you're the smartest person in the room. A couple at the next booth glanced over. I felt heat rise in my face, but I did not respond. Lacey's eyes filled, but her voice stayed clear. We wanted you to be part of our future. Instead, you came here with paperwork to tell us we're not good enough. That's not what I said. It's what you meant, Dorian snapped. You sit there with your steady job and your perfect little budget, looking down on everyone. Dad looked at me like he had been waiting for this opening. You've changed, he said. Success has made you hard. That one hit deeper than I wanted it to. Because I had not changed into something hard. I had changed into someone tired of being used. But in that restaurant, with strangers pretending not to listen, and my mother staring into her coffee, I felt myself being put on trial again. Not the loan, not the numbers, me. I paid for my coffee and left before the conversation turned worse. Outside, I sat in my car with the engine off. Rain had started to mist against the windshield. Across the parking lot, a family climbed into a minivan, laughing as they tried to get a toddler into a car seat. I watched them longer than I should have. Then I asked myself the question I had been avoiding. If I sign, I may lose my future. If I refuse, I may lose my family. There was no painless choice. And maybe that was the point. Maybe for years, I had chosen the pain that kept everybody else comfortable. The next day at work, one of my younger team leads, Mason, stopped by my office. He was in his late 20s, good worker, quiet, the kind of man who apologized before asking a reasonable question. He looked embarrassed. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." He told me his parents kept asking him for money. Not much at first, then more, then bills, then a car payment. He had started falling behind on his own rent. He rubbed both hands together and said, "How do you say no without feeling like a bad son?" I looked at him and saw a younger version of myself. Careful, dutiful, exhausted. I wanted to give him a clean answer, something wise. Instead, I told him the truth. "You say no before resentment turns you into someone you don't recognize." He nodded. But after he left, I sat there a long time. Because I had given him advice, I was still learning how to live. That evening, Ronan called. His voice was heavy. "Quinton, I heard something you need to know." I stepped out onto my back porch, away from the noise of the dishwasher. Ronan told me Dad had been calling relatives privately, telling them I had abandoned Dorian, telling them I cared more about my credit score than my brother's wedding, telling them I had become selfish and cold. Not one mention of the hidden debts. Not one mention of the side financing. Not one mention of the risk, only loyalty, only shame, only obedience dressed up as family values. When the call ended, I stood in the dark until the porch light clicked on by itself. That was when the truth finally settled in. They were not asking for help. They were asking me to surrender. Later, I opened my home safe and took out the blue savings book. I held it under the kitchen light, looking at the faded cover and the first childish deposit entries. For years, I thought that book meant discipline. That night, I understood it meant freedom. And some people become angry the moment they realize they can no longer control yours. 2 days later, I stopped trying to keep the peace. That was when everything turned violent. The call came late in the afternoon while I was still at work. Dad's name lit up my phone, and for a moment I just stared at it. I expected anger. I expected another lecture. Instead, when I answered, his voice sounded steady. "Come by tonight," he said. "No arguing. We need to settle this like a family." That word still had power over me, family. Even after everything, part of me wanted to believe there was something left to save. So I finished my shift, drove home, changed out of my work shirt, and stood in my bedroom for a minute with my hand on the dresser. The blue savings book was in the safe. I do not know why, but I took it out and slipped it inside my jacket pocket. Maybe I wanted the reminder. Maybe I needed something in that house that still belonged to me. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, the porch light was already on. I walked in without knocking, the way I had done my whole life. Then I saw the dining room table. Mortgage papers, a pen, the same folder. Dorian stood near the kitchen entry with his arms crossed. Lachi sat beside him, pale but determined. Mom was near the sink, twisting a dish towel in both hands. Dad stood at the head of the table like a man about to run a meeting. No one asked how I was. No one offered coffee. Dad pointed to the chair. "Sit down." I stayed standing. "I thought we were talking," I said. "We are," Dorian answered. "Talking about you finally doing the right thing." That was when I understood. This was not peace. This was another setup. Dad pushed the folder forward. "We are done going in circles. Sign it, and we put this behind us." "No." The word came out before he finished breathing. His eyes narrowed. I kept my voice even. "I know about the hidden debt. I know about the private financing agreement. I know about the deposit. I know the house is already a problem before you even own it." Lacey's lips parted. Dorian looked away for half a second, just enough to confirm it. Dad tapped the table with 2 fingers. "You think you know everything because some advisor filled your head with fear." "No," I said. "I know what a legal obligation is, and I'm not putting my future on the line to cover choices I didn't make." Dorian stepped forward. "There it is, that attitude. You always make it sound like we're beneath you. I'm not responsible for fixing problems other people created." The room changed. Mom whispered, "Quinton," but I could not stop now. "I have helped this family whenever I could. I helped with repairs. I helped with bills. I showed up when no one else wanted the boring work. But this is not help. This is asking me to become responsible for a mortgage I won't live in, control, or benefit from." Dad's face turned a deep shade of red. "You listen to me," he said. "Your brother is getting married. He is trying to build something. So am I. That answer hit him harder than I expected. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Dorian said quietly, "One signature could have prevented all this." I looked at him. Really looked. My older brother was not worried about me. He was not ashamed. He was angry that I had stopped being useful. Dad came around the table so fast the chair scraped behind him. The slap landed before I could step back. My glasses flew off my face and struck the hardwood with a sharp crack. The room blurred at the edges. I raised one hand on instinct, but another shove sent me sideways into the dining chair. My shoulder hit first. Something gave way inside me, and that pain was immediate, deep, hot. I dropped to one knee, trying not to cry out, but the sound came anyway. Mom screamed and rushed toward me. Dad shoved her back. She stumbled against the chair and went down hard. For one terrible second, the whole room froze. Dorian moved, not toward me, toward the papers. He bent and picked up the mortgage folder from the floor, brushing the corner like it was more important than his own brother, lying beside it. That image burned into me. Lachi covered her mouth. This has gone too far. But she did not call for help. I tried to stand. My right arm would not work. My legs shook under me. Dad pointed at the front door, breathing hard. "You idiot," he said. "You chose your credit score over your own brother." I looked at Mom on the floor. She was trying to sit up, tears on her face. "Dad," I said, though I barely recognized my own voice. He stepped closer. "You deserve to be beaten. Get out of my sight." No one corrected him. No one said, "That's enough." No one reached for me. I turned toward the door, because staying there felt more dangerous than leaving. Each movement sent pain through my shoulder and down my side. My left hand found the wall. I used it to pull myself forward. Near the entryway, the blue savings book slipped from my jacket pocket. It landed beside my broken glasses. A small red stain touched the faded cover. The same book Dad once told me was proof of freedom was now lying on the floor of his house, marked by what his anger had done. I stared at it for 1 second too long. Then Dorian's voice came from behind me. "Just go, Quinton." So I did. I dragged myself down the porch steps, one painful movement at a time. The night air hit my face. The driveway seemed longer than it ever had before. I could not use my right arm. My legs barely held me. Behind me, the house stayed lit and closed. For the first time in my life, I had no idea where home was anymore. There was only one person left who might help me, and reaching his front door would become the hardest journey of my life. Ronan Mercer lived 6 houses down and around the corner. On an ordinary day, that was nothing. A short walk, 2 minutes if I cut across the sidewalk by the maple trees. That night, it felt like crossing a county line. I could not drive. My glasses were broken, my vision blurred, and my right arm hung close to my body like it no longer belonged to me. Every step sent a hard jolt through my legs. The air smelled damp, and the porch lights along the street looked soft and doubled, like I was seeing everything through water. I kept one thought in my head: make it to Ronan's door. Not home, not safety, just the door. Ronan had been married to my older sister before she passed. He was not tied to us by blood anymore, at least not in the way people usually count family. But he had never played the games my father played. He listened before he judged. He noticed what other people avoided. Halfway down the sidewalk, my knee gave out. I caught myself against a mailbox and stood there breathing in short, careful pulls. Behind me, my parents' house stayed lit. No headlights, no footsteps, no one calling my name. That told me everything. When I finally reached Ronan's porch, I could barely lift my left hand. I knocked once, too soft. Then again harder. The door opened and Ronan's face changed in layers. Confusion first, then shock, then something close to horror. "Quinton," I tried to answer, but my mouth would not form the words. He stepped forward and caught me under my good arm as my legs folded. "Who did this?" I looked at him. One eye was already swelling, and the porch light burned bright above his shoulder. "My father," I said. Ronan went still for half a second. Then he moved fast. "Call 911, he shouted into the house. "Right now." That was the first moment since the slap that someone chose my safety without asking what it might cost them. I remember the ambulance lights more than the ride itself. Red and white flashing against tree trunks. A paramedic asking me to follow his finger. Ronan answering questions when I could not. At the emergency room, everything became pieces. A sling, a scan, a doctor saying my shoulder was dislocated, a nurse cleaning my face, someone asking how many times I was hit. The police arrived sometime after midnight. Detective Corinne Voss introduced herself quietly, not rushing me, not softening the situation into something smaller. She listened while I told her about the mortgage papers, the pressure, The refusal, my mother being pushed. Dorian picking up the folder instead of helping me. When I finished, she asked, "Are you afraid of what your family might do next?" I stared at the blanket over my legs. The answer should have been no. They were my family. But after that night, the word family did not protect anyone. "Yes," I said. By morning, my body felt heavy from medication and exhaustion. Ronan sat in the chair beside the hospital bed, with his elbows on his knees. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were tired. He had not gone home. "You don't have to decide everything today," he said. "But you do need to protect yourself." I looked toward the window. The sky was pale gray over the parking garage. For years, every crisis in our family had pulled the same question out of me. How do I keep everyone together? That morning, another question finally took its place. How do I keep myself alive? Not just breathing alive, with a future, with dignity, with a life that was not collateral for someone else's bad choices. Later that day, Ronan brought a folder from his truck. "I should shown you sooner," he said. "I didn't realize how far they would take it." Inside were printed texts, emails, and screenshots. Messages Dorian had sent about the house, notes about the deposit. A voicemail where Dad said, "Quinton will come around. He always does when enough people lean on him." There it was, plain as daylight. They had not hoped I would help. They had counted on pressure breaking me. Ronan pointed to one email chain. "They knew the lender was worried before they ever asked you." They knew. I read and hands shook. Not from fear this time. From clarity. A pattern is harder to dismiss than a single bad night. One bruise can be explained away by an angry person. Months of planning cannot. 2 days later, Mason from work came by during visiting hours. He brought a small card signed by people from my department. Inside, in his careful handwriting, he had written, "You taught me that boundaries matter." I had to look away for a moment. Because the truth was, I had taught him something I was only just beginning to believe. Attorney Merrick Sloan came that afternoon. Ronan had called him. Merrick was calm, gray-haired, and direct in a way I appreciated. He reviewed the medical report, the police notes, and Ronan's folder. Then he said, "The strongest case is not built from anger. It is built from evidence. For most of my life, I wanted my family to understand me. Now I wanted the truth documented clearly enough that nobody could twist it into something else." Before I left the hospital, Ronan handed me one more sealed envelope. "I found this tucked behind the mortgage packet Dorian gave me," he said. "You need to see it before they know you have it." I held the envelope on my lap for several seconds. My shoulder throbbed, my face ached. My mother had left 3 voicemails I had not listened to yet. Then I opened it. What I found inside changed everything. Inside Ronan's envelope was a copy of the private agreement Dorian never meant for me to see. At first, I read it slowly because pain medication and exhaustion made the words swim a little. Then Merrick Sloan read it aloud in his office 2 days later, and every sentence landed with weight. The house deal had been weaker than anyone admitted. The deposit was non-refundable. The side financing carried terms no responsible buyer would accept without a strong cash reserve. Dorian had projected commissions he had not earned yet. Lacey's wedding expenses were listed as family contributions, even though no such contributions were guaranteed. Then came the part that made Merrick stop and look at me. My father had agreed privately to cover certain shortfalls if the closing became difficult, with retirement money he did not actually have available. That was when I understood why he had panicked. The whole plan balanced on my signature. Not because I was loved, not because I was trusted, because my credit and savings were the only solid thing in a structure full of cracks. I was not being asked to help my brother build a home. I was being chosen as the shock absorber. Over the next several weeks, Merrick built a timeline, not with speeches, with paper. Texts from Dorian, voicemails from Dad, the mortgage packet, the side agreement, medical reports, photos of my injuries, Ronan's statement, Detective Corinne Voss's report, even the record of calls made to relatives after I refused to sign. Piece by piece, the story stopped belonging to my father. Evidence has a way of stripping drama down to facts. But Dorian was not done. A week before the hearing, his attorney sent over a response that nearly made me laugh until I realized how dangerous it was. They claimed I had exaggerated the attack. They suggested I had become obsessed with controlling Dorian's finances. They said I had provoked my father by insulting the family. Worst of all, they attached screenshots of messages between Dorian and me. Edited screenshots. One made it look like I had said, "You'll lose everything without me." The full message actually said, "If the numbers are accurate, you'll lose everything without a realistic plan." Another made it seem like I had threatened to expose him. The original thread showed I had asked him to be honest before anyone got hurt financially. For a few days, the old pressure returned in a new suit. An uncle stopped returning my calls. A cousin sent me a message saying, "Maybe you should let this go before the family name is ruined." A woman from my parents' church left a voicemail telling me forgiveness was more important than being right. I saved every message, not because I wanted revenge, because I had learned that silence gives dishonest people room to decorate the truth. Merrick found the weakness quickly. "Screenshots are not records," he said, leaning back in his chair. "They forgot metadata. The original server data showed timestamps, missing portions, and altered context. Dorian had assumed nobody would look past the surface. He still thought I was the younger brother who would get embarrassed and back down. He was wrong. The hearing was held in a small county courtroom that smelled faintly of old wood and floor polish. My shoulder was still in a brace under my jacket. Ronan sat behind me. Mom sat 2 rows back, separated from Dad for the first time in my memory. Dorian avoided my eyes. Dad did not, at least not at first. Their attorney tried to make it sound like a family misunderstanding that got out of hand. Merrick stood and let him finish. Then he presented the medical report. Then the photos. Then the mortgage documents. Then the side agreement. Then the edited messages beside the full records. The room changed slowly, the way a storm changes the color of the sky before the rain starts. Detective Voss testified in a steady voice. She explained what I had reported, what Ronan had witnessed, and how my injuries matched the timeline. Then Merrick asked one question that made the air leave the room. "Mr. Keegan, your son refused to co-sign a mortgage. Is that correct?" Dad's attorney objected. Judge Eleanor Hargrove overruled it. Dad answered yes. Merrick's voice stayed calm. "And after that refusal, he left your home injured enough to require emergency medical care?" Dad looked down. For months, I had imagined what that moment would feel like. I thought I would feel triumph, satisfaction, maybe even relief. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and touched the blue savings book. The cover was still faintly stained at one corner. Inside, the first deposit line was still there. $10.42. A kid's first attempt at building something nobody could take. For years, I thought that little book was about money. Sitting there, I understood it was about self-respect. No one could co-sign that away unless I handed it over. By the time Judge Hargrove reviewed the records, the false story had fallen apart. She did not make grand speeches. Judges rarely do. She simply noted the inconsistencies, the documented pressure, the altered communications, and the seriousness of the assault allegations. Protective orders remained in place. The financial conduct was referred for further review. The family narrative my father had carried for decades cracked in public. As people stood to leave, Dad finally looked at me. I had waited so long to see regret on his face. What I saw instead was fear, not fear for me, fear of consequences. Somehow that hurt in a way victory could not heal. The court could punish what happened, but it could not answer the question that still haunted me. What do you do when the people who broke your heart share your last name? After the hearing, people kept asking me if I felt better. I never knew how to answer that. Better is a small word for something that complicated. A year later, my shoulder worked again, but not the way it used to. I could lift a grocery bag. I could drive. I could sleep without waking every time I rolled onto my right side. But if I reached too quickly or carried too much weight, a sharp reminder ran down my arm. The body remembers what the mind tries to organize into lessons. My father accepted a plea agreement connected to the assault. There were court costs, probation terms, mandatory counseling, and a protective order that stayed in place. Dorian faced consequences too. Not the kind people cheer about, but the kind that hollow out a public image. The mortgage deal collapsed. The house went to another buyer. Lassie ended the engagement after the financial records came out. She called me once. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was short. She said she was sorry for not helping me that night. She said she had been afraid of Dorian's anger and embarrassed by the truth. I believed part of it. I also knew belief did not require reopening the door. That is something recovery taught me. You can understand someone and still keep distance. Mom changed the most quietly. She moved into a small apartment near Easttown, close enough to walk to a pharmacy and a little bakery she liked. The first time I visited, she had 2 mugs on the counter and no television playing in the background. No Dad's voice, no tension tucked into the walls. She looked smaller but freer. We sat at her kitchen table while rain moved down the window in thin lines. "I should have stood up sooner," she said. I looked at her hands. They still twisted together when she was nervous. You didn't cause what he did, I told her. No, she said. But I helped create the room where he thought he could do it. That was the most honest thing anyone in my family had said to me. I did not forgive everything in that moment. Life is not that neat. But I reached across the table and took her hand. Healing does not require perfect people. It requires honest ones. Work became part of my recovery in ways I did not expect. Mason, the young team lead who once asked me how to say no without guilt, helped me organize a small financial boundaries workshop at the community center. We expected maybe 10 people. 32 showed up: retired couples, divorced fathers, widows, adult children caring for aging parents. A woman in her 60s said her son wanted her to co-sign for a truck she knew he could not afford. A man near 70 admitted he had drained savings twice because his daughter called it family support. I stood at the front of that room and told them the truth. Helping someone should not require destroying your own stability. No one clapped at first. They just nodded. That quiet nod meant more than applause. A few months later, a letter arrived from Dorian. No demands, no accusations. Just 2 pages written in handwriting I had known since childhood. He said he was ashamed. He said he had convinced himself that wanting a better life justified pressuring me. He admitted he had let Dad fight battles he should have fought himself. He asked if we could talk someday. I read it twice, then I placed it in a drawer. Not the trash. Not my heart, a drawer. Some answers need time to become clear. When I finally bought my new place, it was not large. A 2-bedroom house with old hardwood floors, a narrow porch, and a maple tree in front that turned gold in October. Ronan helped me carry boxes on moving day. Mason showed up after work with pizza and a borrowed dolly. Near sunset, I opened one last cardboard box in my office. Inside was the blue savings book. The cover was faded. One corner still carried a faint stain no amount of careful cleaning had erased. I sat down at my desk and opened to the first page, $10.42. A boy's first proof that his future could belong to him. For years, I thought that book was about discipline. Then I thought it was about survival. Now, sitting in a house nobody forced me into, nobody guilted me over, nobody tied to my name without permission, I understood it differently. It was about self-worth. I placed it in the top drawer beside the keys to my new home. That night, a few of us gathered by Reed's Lake, nothing fancy. Sandwiches, folding chairs, paper plates, and the kind of laughter that does not ask you to pretend. Ronan was there, Mason too. Mom came for an hour and brought lemon bars in a tin she had owned since I was a kid. No one made speeches. No one said everything happened for a reason. I hate that phrase. Some things happen because people make selfish choices, and other people are left to heal from them. But as the sun dropped over the water, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. Not because every wound had closed. Because I no longer lived inside the house that made them. My father once told me, every dollar you save is a piece of freedom. For most of my life, I thought he meant money. He didn't know he was teaching me something bigger. Freedom is being able to say no without begging to be understood. Freedom is letting consequences belong to the people who created them. Freedom is walking away without hatred, even when your heart still aches. And family? Family is not proven by a last name. Family is proven by who opens the door when you can barely stand. My name is Quinton Keegan, and losing my family taught me something I never expected. The people who truly love you will never ask you to destroy yourself to prove it.